It was a cold and silent night on the lower deck of the Titanic. The air was icy, and the smell of salt water was almost suffocating. The sound of the engines echoed through the empty corridors, but suddenly, a desperate scream cut through the air. A scream that shouldn't have been there. A curious passenger decided to follow the sound. His boots clattered against the wooden floor as he descended the stairs, each step faster, more urgent. The screams seemed to come from everywhere, but when he reached the spot, nothing. Just an empty hallway, lit by a single flickering light. On the floor, drag marks, as if something heavy had been pulled. And a puddle of salt water, fresh, as if it had just been spilled. He looked around, trying to understand, when a deep, rumbling sound made the ship's hull tremble. Something enormous was out there, scraping against the ship, as if testing its strength. And then, silence. But that silence was worse than any scream. Because, in that moment, the passenger realized he wasn't alone. And whatever was out there was coming inside. The Titanic was more than a ship. It was a symbol of luxury, technology, and human ambition. But, like many grand things, it carried secrets. Secrets never meant to come to light. Thomas Harper, a historian on board, was no ordinary man. Since childhood, he had been fascinated by unsolved mysteries. His journey on the Titanic wasn't just a trip, it was a quest for the truth. He was investigating reports of mysterious disappearances in a region of the ocean known as the Depths Triangle. An area where ships vanished without a trace, and where survivors spoke of things that defied logic. Thomas discovered that the Titanic was passing through this region. And while studying ancient maps in the ship's library, he found a chilling note. Here, the screams of men are like bait, and what answers is not human. That night, the screams began, and Thomas realized the Titanic wasn't just crossing the Depths Triangle. It was being hunted. The screams weren't human. Thomas realized this too late. They were bait, a sonic trap created by something in the depths. Something that now followed the Titanic, scraping against the hull with sinister persistence. The first evidence came the next morning. Passengers began to disappear. First, a couple walking on the deck. Then, a crew member on night watch. No bodies were found, only drag marks and puddles of salt water. Thomas tried to warn the crew, but no one believed him. After all, the Titanic was unsinkable, right? They were more concerned with the ship's luxury than stories of sea monsters. But Thomas knew something was wrong. He began investigating on his own, and what he found left him speechless. Marks of tentacles on the ship's sides, as if something colossal had tried to grab it. And then, the first attack happened. A deafening sound echoed through the hull, followed by an impact that made the ship tremble. Thomas ran to the lower deck and found water flooding the corridors. The creature was testing the ship, and worse, it was winning. The Titanic began to tilt slightly, and panic spread. Passengers ran through the corridors, while the crew tried to contain the flooding. Thomas knew he had to act fast. He found an old book in the library, a logbook from a ship that had disappeared in the Depths Triangle. In it, there was a passage that caught his attention. The creature is sensitive to sound. Certain frequencies can repel it. Thomas had an idea. He ran to the ship's orchestra, which was still playing elegant waltzes as if nothing was happening. He explained the situation, but the musicians hesitated. Play for a monster? That's ridiculous, said the orchestra leader. But when another impact shook the ship, making the instruments fall to the floor, he hesitated. If this saves the ship, he murmured, picking up his violin. As the orchestra prepared, Thomas ran to the deck. The creature was there. He could see it in the dark waters, a colossal mass of tentacles and glowing eyes. It was approaching, ready to deliver the final blow. The orchestra began to play. The melody was strange, dissonant, but it had an immediate effect. The creature stopped, as if hesitating. But then, it began to move again, faster this time. The water was already covering Thomas's feet, and he felt the biting cold of the depths. He shouted for the musicians to keep playing, but his voice was drowned out by the sound of the waves and the creature's screams. The Titanic was losing the battle. Thomas climbed onto the deck, the signal bell in one hand and a metal bar in the other. He struck the bell with all his strength, and the sharp sound echoed like thunder. The creature recoiled, but only for a moment. It attacked again, this time with more force. For a moment, Thomas hesitated. What if the bell didn't work? What if he was only speeding up the inevitable? But when the creature emerged again, its glowing eyes fixed on him, he had no choice. He struck the bell once more, even harder, and the sound echoed like a war cry. The ship was sinking fast now. The water covered the deck, and the creature was almost upon them. Thomas rang the bell one last time, with all the strength he had. The creature recoiled, its tentacles writhing in agony. It plunged into the waters, but the Titanic was already lost. Thomas looked at the bell, now cracked and silent. He knew the creature wasn't dead, just delayed. And then, the ship disappeared into the icy waters, taking with it secrets that would never be revealed. Thomas survived. He was rescued hours later in a lifeboat. But as he looked into the dark waters, he saw something that made him doubt his sanity. A shadow moving beneath the boat, following him in silence. And then, it disappeared, leaving only an oil slick on the surface. The creature was still there. And it wasn't in a hurry. The Titanic sank, but its story didn't end. In the depths of the ocean, something still waits. Something that doesn't forget. Something that doesn't forgive. And perhaps one day it will return.